Welcome to Awakening Within. I'm your host, Jill McPherson. If you're a parent, you'll want to listen in. Are you concerned about how much screen time your child is experiencing in a day? Do you find it almost impossible to get them to put a device down or walk away from a screen? Well, today, my guest, Elaine Uskoski, is here to talk to me about her experience with her son and a gaming addiction. She has written a book entitled Seeing Through the Cracks and now does speaking events on this topic. Elaine, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me, how did this start? How did you get involved in speaking about gaming addiction?
So initially I wanted to write a book about the transition between parenting your child and parenting your adult child. And as I was considering writing that book, we discovered that my son had a video gaming addiction while he was at university. And it took me by surprise because I was raising my boys during the 90s and into the millennium, and gaming was something new and exciting, and we were all really seduced by the progression of technology and what it could offer. And we were told that, you know, it was educational and it would help with hand-eye coordination, and it was fun and recreational. And really the only restrictions that we needed to be made aware of was keeping kids safe from online predators, so keeping their personal information private, and making sure they were choosing age-appropriate games. And so I really thought I had all that covered, and discovered later that when my son was leaving his primary school and going into a new middle school for a specialized program, he really didn't feel like he fit in. He couldn't find a way to get into the inner circle that was already in existence at the school, and so felt really ostracized and isolated. And so he, at that time, started online gaming to sort of find his own little tribe of, you know, gamers that understood how he felt, and friendships that he could make online. And so, you know, he did talk about his online friends. We did have conversations about it, but I didn't realize that, you know, he was really escaping into that world and not living in the world outside of the virtual screen time. Wow.
So now once he reaches university, you find out that this has been, in retrospect, you realize sort of when it started and how it started.
Right.
And now you're dealing with a son who has a gaming addiction. What does that look like? Like, when you say gaming addiction, how bad was it?
So he went into first year. He finished. He told us everything was good. In fact, he took us out for a celebratory dinner. And we later learned that it wasn't. So it had already started in first year. He entered the university feeling quite smart, coming out of a gifted program, and then learned that there were children that were, well, students that were much smarter, and so he started to lack his own confidence in himself as a student and started to game more. So he came home for the summer, he worked, and then he went back to school, and he started communicating a lot less. When we did see him, I'd noticed his weight was dropping. I noticed that he had an odor. His hair was greasy. His skin was starting to break out. Every time I asked him questions about it, of course, he had an answer. He chalked everything up to, you know, being busy at school, and I sort of lied to myself as well because I didn't know what I was looking for.
Right.
And then 2 months in to second year, I got an email from him, and he had literally been gaming all night, sleeping all day. He hadn't attended a class for 2 months, and he's 6'2". He weighed 127 pounds. The skin was broken out. He had tremors. His eyes were dilated all the time. He stopped grooming, so thus the odor. So he really looked like an addict.
Wow.
And I was caught off guard again because I couldn't imagine that you could have symptoms like that from video gaming.
Right. And because he wasn't at home, you were kind of in the no news is good news kind of thinking, haven't heard from him, so I assume everything's well, not knowing that this is getting progressively worse and severe.
Right.
Because he wasn't under your own roof, so
right.
You weren't seeing this.
Well, he could hide it really well, and you know, addicts do become great manipulators. They don't want to give it up. They'll lie to keep it.
Right.
But I did start to feel like he was pulling away, and I even actually sent him a text saying, "Are you even attending classes? Because you appeared to be a bit of a night hawk," because he would be answering my texts at 3 a.m. And it was just a matter of days after that I got the email.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's come to the point where he hasn't attended a class in a couple of months. He's not, self-care is, non-existent. So what do you do? What happened?
We brought him home, and first I took him to the doctors to make sure he was okay, health-wise. He was diagnosed with extreme depression and anxiety at that time. He did start seeing a counselor right away. It wasn't an addiction therapy specific counselor, but he did have 8 weeks of counseling. We changed his timing so that he was awake during the day. His sleep-awake cycle was changed. I put him on a very healthy diet, and not a diet to lose weight, but a healthier weight program. I took him to fitness classes to get him exercising, to hope that would help him with the mental health aspect. All gaming was removed from the home, so it was really a cold turkey withdrawal for him.
Wow.
It was painful physically, painful mentally, and as well, we had taken away his entire social circle.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but he must have been ready for this, or wanting it.
He wanted the help. He didn't want to admit that it was an addiction, though. He just wanted to be treated for depression and anxiety. But because he was gaming all night and sleeping all day, that did have to be given up for him to start taking a look at the emotional issues that he needed to address.
Wow. So how long from the time you find out it's a severe, you bring him home, how long before you started seeing changes?
Changes in terms of?
Of like him breaking the cycle of this addiction.
Well, he didn't really break it. I mean, he got through the 8 weeks. We took him back for second semester because we'd learned that first semester had been a disaster and he'd actually failed 3 courses. So we suggested that he go back if he was ready and pick up those 3 courses so he didn't lose the entire year. We dropped him off at residence and he turned the computer on and loaded the game thinking that he could just play for 1 hour. And 1 hour led into 2 hours, and then he hadn't gone to a class for a week. At that point, I started to really pay attention to that gut feeling again that I was having before, and so we drove to the school.
Like another relapse.
He had a total relapse. Yeah.
So we'll pick up more on that when we come back from the break. Welcome back. Today we're talking about gaming addictions. My guest, Elaine Uskoski, has firsthand experience with this as she's been assisting her son heal his gaming disorder. It has been a challenging time for Elaine and her husband, and now Elaine is reaching out to help other parents who find themselves struggling with their child's screen addiction. So Elaine, you were talking about your son before the break about how he had a relapse.
Right.
He goes back to university and he thinks he'll be okay. He'll just play a game, and then it turns into an extended period of time again. Yeah,
another week of gaming before we went and checked on him. I don't know how much longer it would have gone otherwise. I think it's kind of like the alcoholic that thinks they can have 1 drink. He thought he could play for an hour.
Right.
So we brought him home again, and we had a long conversation. And I tried to really understand. I didn't want to come down hard on him because I knew he had the anxiety, I knew he had the depression, and so I really wanted to get to the core of, what the issue was. And then I asked him, what is it that you need? What do you need now? And he said, I need you to drive me to school and walk me to class until I can do it on my own. If you take me back, I will game again. So he knew he couldn't self-regulate.
Right. So thank goodness he had that self-awareness.
Right.
That he needed that much support.
Right.
Right. So where did you go from there? So you ended up...
I drove him.
You did all those things?
For weeks, yeah.
And
then when he was ready to do it on his own, he was required full accountability. He had to take photographs of himself in the lecture room or in the classroom, email it to me so I knew he was actually in class, and then he would come home every weekend. That got us through that semester. And then the next year he lived with a family friend in Guelph. So there was and he still came home on weekends. He came home on weekends throughout. This past year was his 5th year, and he actually lived with us. We downsized and moved closer to where the university is, and so he actually lived with us for the last year and had full support.
So from the time you found out till now, is it 4 years has
3 years.
3, and he has needed support through that whole 3 years.
He has, yeah.
Is he still needing your support?
He's finished school. He's moving out to Toronto because he has a full-time job now, and he's ready to. He's been 11 months detox fully from gaming. It took him 2 years to admit that he had an addiction, first of all, and once he admitted it, then it's kind of like, I remember Robert Downey Jr., who had a drug and alcohol problem, said, deciding was the difficult part, but the actual leaving the drugs and alcohol behind wasn't difficult once he decided. So for Jake, once he decided, he was willing to put in the work at that point. And I would say in the last month, he's told me that the desire to game is no longer on the register. And he realizes now that he can never game again.
Right.
He made all kinds of new friends at school. He got involved in activities outside of the classroom. He started doing more sports again. So he found ways to replace that dopamine high that the video gaming.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. It's not about eliminating a behavior as much as it's about replacing.
Replacing it, yeah.
Right.
And replacing the social aspect of it as well.
Right.
Yeah. He got counseling at the school as well. The University of Guelph were fantastic. They provide him a counselor and a special needs advisor. So he had support there as well.
Right. So what would you say, so in hindsight, you feel like he was very susceptible to this because he was feeling sort of socially outcast.
Yeah.
So as parents, we really want to pay attention if we're, noticing that our children aren't really, interacting well with peers or not having many social, interactions or relationships with other people, that they're going to turn and find this sort of easy way.
Yeah,
they
could, certainly, yeah.
With a gaming addiction, because they're interacting with people through a screen.
Yeah, and he believed those were his real friends. I was not allowed to say they're not your real friends because, to him they were his real friends. They were people, and he was globally connecting with them. Right.
So what do you want parents then to know when you're creating this awareness? What's the biggest part of the awareness that you're sharing?
To be paying attention to the signs and the symptoms, changes in mood, changes in sleep patterns, the spending more time on the computer, them getting angry if you want to take the computer away or ask them to leave the computer at any time. You need to start looking for those things. That's the awareness aspect of it. But if you do have a child or an adult child that you think is addicted to video gaming, they can't self-regulate. They cannot walk away from that on their own. They absolutely need your support and your help and your understanding.
So to realize too that if you have children, teens or older, still you need to, touch base and be engaged as a parent.
Absolutely.
It's not
Eat your meals at the table.
Right.
Yeah. Have non-screen times. If you think there's issues, disconnect the internet when it's bedtime. When you're in the car traveling, make sure it's a screen-free time so that you can communicate with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, screen-free. So really schedule in screen-free times.
Yeah. Also, I think what's important is, parents keep their kids so busy now with activities outside of school. They're not really giving them any downtime or any time to go hang with their friends. They're hanging with kids at school. They may not necessarily be their close friends depending on their schedule, especially in high school. Then they're going off and they're hanging with the kids that they're doing whatever activity like dancing or sports, and then they go home to homework, and then they kind of want to connect to their friends then, and it's late at night, and so we need to allow for less busyness and more time for them to connect with their friends, even if it is online, because that's not going away. Kids are going to continue connecting online.
Right.
But I'm hearing that kids are up until 3, 4 o'clock in the morning because they're just hungry for that time to spend with friends.
Right. Well, we'll continue this interesting discussion when we come back from the break. Today I have with me Elaine Uskoski, author of a book, Seeing Through the Cracks. Something she discusses in this book is her son's gaming addiction, and she is here with me today to talk about balancing and regulating screen time with children. Up until now, we've been talking more about sort of teen and young 20s age group. But let's even talk about, younger children, because now the parents today are dealing with having to deal with screen time with really young children.
Yeah.
So what would you say or recommend, parents do as far as, regulating time, or what would your suggestions be around screen time?
So in terms of the pediatric recommendation, that's the word I'm looking for, sorry, they suggest no screen time from the age of birth to 2, and then from 2 to preteen it's 1 hour a day, and teenagers it's 2 hours a day, and that doesn't include homework time on screen, so that's just recreational screen time.
And I already know, even from my own, I have 4 kids myself, and I'm sure that they surpass that, a huge amount.
I think most adults, most parents are too.
Right.
We're spending a lot of time on our iPhones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need to be role modeling what we want
Absolutely.
our kids doing, for sure.
Right.
Are we putting the phone down for mealtime? Are we putting the phone down
right.
To interact and talk?
Yeah, and the more time you spend on your phone as a parent, and the more your child sees how drawn in you are by it, the more they want that.
Right. And so they see that as a way of feeding themselves too. Like,
Sure.
A lot of parents are, checking into their social media or checking in to see who's paying attention to me, and
Right.
so then
And disengaging from parenting.
disengaging from their own family members.
Right.
Right. And we were talking during the break too about how with younger children in particular, there's a real concern about physiologically rewiring
Right.
kids.
We are changing the brains of our children if we're giving them technology before the age of 2. So, I'm hearing about parents who are sending their children to bed to read their own story, have their story read to them on an iPad, and instead of the parents sitting with a book and reading. And so then you're removing that ability for a child to have an interaction with another human being and hear inflection and emotion in a voice. And if the screen is doing the job for the child, if they have to just touch a button and everything's done for them, you then take away the ability for that child to think for themselves and figure it out themselves and be more imaginative and creative.
Right, and even just having that lack of human interaction. I mean, I think of story time when my kids were little, it was cuddle time too.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about reading
Yeah.
a book, it was interacting.
Right.
And I think too, I also teach part-time, and I'm seeing more and more, and I think any of the elementary school teachers out there will agree with me that we're seeing more and more children coming into kindergarten really sort of antsy, inattentive, and actually demonstrating what I would call drug addictive behavior.
Right.
Almost like to the point of twitching, like
Right.
they need the screen time, it's been taken away, the drug is gone, and where's their next hit?
Right.
How are they going to get it? And then they end up sort of physically, acting out. They can't sit still, they have to kind of be moving around the room. They're,
Right.
and I think a lot of this, we're dealing with it, a lot more, and I think a lot of that's coming from, screen time that came at a young age, and now they're expected to come to school all day and not have, minimal screen time, and they just don't know how to handle it. So what would you say then is happening to these little, young children, preschoolers, kindergartners that are coming in with this addiction or this behavior?
And the behavior sounds like withdrawal symptoms that they're having, right? They're leaving the screen time from home and then not being allowed. The research now is showing, because the child's frontal lobe of the brain doesn't fully develop until they're 25 years old, so there's constant development and growth happening there. And they're showing now that excessive screen time is changing the brain to the point where it is now mimicking neurological disorders such as anxiety, depression, ADD, OCD. And so now we've reached the stage where, is this someone who has ADD or anxiety, or is it being exacerbated by the screen time addiction? Or was it already there mildly and it's making it worse? In my son's case, he had been diagnosed with ADHD at age 19 when we took him to the doctor as well. And so he was treated for that. And when he finally detoxed, within 6 months of detoxing, the symptoms of that started to show as much, much less, and he didn't feel he needed to take anything for it anymore. The anxiety was much less. The depression was manageable. He had tics. The tics completely disappeared.
Wow. So really, I mean, I'm thinking of parents watching, and as a parent myself, I'm already thinking, what am I going to do with this information? And I think it's just a real wake-up call. This is an awakening of we need to continue, or if you haven't already, be a very conscious parent.
Right.
Like when you're in the job of parenting, you cannot sleep at the wheel.
No.
And not from a place of being intrusive or invasive. It's just about being conscious of, are you spending time with them? Are you inviting them to have less screen time, and invite them the skill of how to self-regulate, and role modeling that. And that's what I see, happening all the time is families at a restaurant, and mom and dad are on their device, and the little one has an iPad, and it's like, well, the whole idea of coming to not only feed our bodies, but feed ourselves emotionally is being lost.
Sure.
And so that's, I think, number one message that I personally want to get across, is that we really need to make sure through this digital age that we stay conscious as parents.
I think too, we probably need to add to that that if your child is struggling inside, they need to have an outlet to talk about that, and it's not the internet. That is not where that should be. So we also need to give our kids permission to come to us and in a judgmental place and speak about the troubles that they're having, so that they don't go looking for it elsewhere.
Great. So Elaine, how can the viewers get a hold of you, either to book you for a speaking event or to get a copy of your book?
So they can find the link to the book on my website, which is ElaineUskoski.com, and they can contact me as well through the website, because I'm mostly speaking through schools to therapists, teachers, parents, students.
Great. Great. Well, Elaine, thank you for coming in, sharing your story with us. Thank you for bringing awareness to this, so that we can remember as parents that we need to wake up and be more conscious. It's a very valuable message. And thank you for joining us on our journey of awakening within.